because it sounds like the voice of God. Thank you, Bob. Our second reading actually is not what is listed in your program. It is Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10, which is found on page 65 if you're following along in the New Testament section of your Bible. Luke 7, 1 through 10. It comes fairly early in Luke's story. It is while Jesus is still, for the most part, in the north, though this particular story takes place in Capernaum. He's already publicly offered words of teaching. He's already engaged in several healing miracles, and his reputation is beginning to spread. Hear these words. After Jesus had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A centurion there had a slave whom he valued highly and who was ill and close to death. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to Jesus, asking him to come and heal his slave. When they came to Jesus, the elders appeared to him and appealed to him earnestly, saying, "The centurion is worthy of having you do this for him, for he loves our people, and it is he who built our synagogue for us." And Jesus went with them. But when Jesus was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to say to Jesus, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you. But only speak the word, and let my servant be healed. For I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes. And to another, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my slave, 'Do this,' and the slave does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at the centurion. And turning to the crowd that followed, he said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When those who had been sent returned to the centurion's house, they found the slave in good health. Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard and the spaces in between inspire us to follow you more closely. Amen. You know it's season when there are people in the balcony. I never served in the military, though I registered for the draft during the Vietnam War. My number in the lottery was very high, and so I was never called up, nor did I ever volunteer. So I have no first-hand experience of being part of a military chain of command. But I do know this: when you are under orders, you are expected to obey your superiors. You are not to challenge their decisions or question their commands. When you are told to jump, you jump and then ask, "How high?" Those of you who are veterans know that in ways that I can only begin to imagine. The centurion in our story from Luke would have understood all that as well. He was both a man who gave orders and a man who received them. In many ways, centurions were the backbone of the Roman army. More often than not, they had risen through the ranks to a position not unlike that of a master sergeant in the U.S. Army. They were well experienced. They were known for their loyalty. They were known for their organizational skills. They were in charge of a cadre of about 100 men, hence the name centurion, akin to century, 100. The centurion in our story from Luke is unnamed. He is simply identified by his rank, the centurion. He is apparently what is sometimes called a God-fearer. A God-fearer. God-fearers were Gentiles, non-Jews, who were attracted to Jewish monotheism and Jewish ethics, but for whatever reason could not or would not take the final step of being fully converted to Judaism. The centurion, being a member of the Roman army, would not have been able to do that. But he stood at a distance and admired and respected what he saw in his Jewish neighbors. This centurion is assigned to oversee the Roman barracks in Capernaum. Over time, he has won the affection and respect of the locals by building them a synagogue. He has not used direct force to keep them in line. After all, that's what he is there to do. The Romans had soldiers stationed throughout the empire, designed to keep the locals in line, to keep them in the empire. No, he doesn't use direct force, though. Rather, he has used diplomacy and largesse. So it is that when his servant, his slave, falls gravely ill, the centurion feels comfortable asking the Jewish elders in Capernaum to serve as go-betweens, so that it might be them who approach this traveling prophet from Nazareth to see if Jesus might be willing to heal his sick slave, which they do. They offer a word of praise when they meet Jesus, a word of praise for the centurion, and they speak of his generous spirit. He deserves your help, Jesus. He's a good man, a solid citizen. So Jesus agrees. He agrees to go with them to where the centurion is. But on his way to the barracks, Jesus is stopped by some of the centurion's friends. And they have a message for Jesus, a message from the centurion. Don't bother coming to my house, Jesus. It's not that I wouldn't love to meet you in person, but I know you're a busy man. I'm not really worth that much of your time. But Jesus, I do recognize authority when I see it. And Jesus, you have authority in spades. I mean, Jesus, I'm under orders myself. When my superiors say go, I go. And I give orders too, and my troops, they just obey them. No question. So Jesus, just give the order, just give the word. I know that when you do, my servant will be healed like that, quick as a wink. And when Jesus heard this, writes Luke, he was amazed. Amazed at the depth of the centurion's trust. Amazed at the depth of his faith. Amazed that this Gentile, this member of the occupying army, this supposed enemy, exhibited such unquestioning belief in the Jewish God's healing power and the way that it was being channeled through Jesus. He is amazed. Through military experience, writes one scholar, the centurion has learned the marks of authority and the chain of commands. His life has been one of giving and receiving orders, and the centurion understands the power vested in such orders. When one who has the authority, such as Jesus had been exhibiting all around the countryside, when one who has such authority, true authority, gives an order, it carries weight. It means something. So it is that in the end, the centurion's servant is healed. Now, obviously, Luke includes this story in his gospel to inspire us to greater trust in Jesus, greater faith in what he says, greater faith in what he does, in what he expects us to do. Indeed, as I read the story and pondered its meaning this week, I kept hearing that old gospel hymn running through my head. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. I went looking for it. It's not in our hymnal. I looked in the hymnal that we had before the hymnal we have now. It's not there. I looked in the hymnal before the hymnal we have now, and it's not there either. Obedience isn't exactly in style these days. Years ago, we even took obedience out of the standard wedding vows, and for very good reason. In a rather lopsided fashion, brides, some of you here no doubt are old enough that this was true of you, brides used to promise to obey their husbands. But husbands were never called on to obey their wives. Children were expected to obey their parents without question or challenge. Because I said so was, and to some extent still is, a favorite line of parents around the world. I'm ashamed to say I've used it myself, and it never proved effective. If a police officer told you to do something, you were expected to do it. If your priest or minister told you God was this way or God was that, you acquiesced. You never heard a pastor say, as I often do, you don't have to agree with me. You were expected to agree, always. There was a time when the world was closely structured, and everyone had his or her place in the chain of command. And when orders were given, you simply obeyed. But that's not so true today, is it? Question authority isn't just a clever bumper sticker. It has become a byword for many. Perhaps it's become a byword for many because all too often in our world, those in positions of power and authority have abused it. As we have seen dramatically illustrated over these past few weeks, as scandal has overtaken Hollywood. Powerful producers abusing their power. No wonder there are those who question authority. Those in power have sometimes taken advantage of their positions and expected people to still simply fall in line. Obedience for obedience' sake is for most Americans a thing of the past. And so it should be. Some may hear this story this morning and wonder if it's nothing more than a throwback to an earlier time, an earlier way of life, a blatant attempt to keep those in power, and those under orders in line. A blatant attempt to bolster a system that seems to be failing on so many counts. And so one finds oneself asking, is there a place for obedience in 21st century America? Is there a place for obedience in 21st century America? I think so, but not blind obedience. Presumably, the soldier or sailor who obeys commands without question does so because he or she has determined those in the chain of command are trustworthy. One places one's confidence in the system itself and in turn those who are part of it. The centurion trusted his superiors, and he had demonstrated to those under his command that he in turn was deserving of their trust. We see that in the way the Jewish elders commend him. Commend him for what? His compassion, for his genuine concern for their well-being. And maybe that is the key to understanding how obedience can and should work. Those in positions of authority should not, and increasingly cannot, simply assume that folks will obediently follow their orders simply because of title or position. Those in authority, like the centurion, must work to earn the trust of others. Those in authority must demonstrate that they have the good of individuals as well as the good of the collective in mind. We will trust and follow the lead of presidents and mayors and governors and other elected officials if we truly believe they care about the rights and concerns of individual citizens as well as the overall health and well-being of the country. Children will listen to their parents, follow their instructions, if those children feel that they are loved and cared for and understood as individuals, not just as cogs in the family machine. Employees will do the bidding of their employers if they can see that doing so will be of benefit not just to the corporation, but to them as individuals. Over the years, I've heard many veterans talk about their experiences in the military. And time again, I have heard them speak of sergeants or captains or other leaders who demonstrated in one way or another that they were not just concerned about accomplishing the mission, but also about protecting the individuals under their command. Such leaders never expect anything of their troops but what they themselves would be willing to do. I would have followed him anywhere is a phrase I've heard more than once in reference to such leaders. In the end, I think Luke tells this story, this amazing story about Jesus and the centurion, to add one more piece of evidence to his growing claim in the gospel that Jesus is just such a trustworthy leader. He tells this story to help us remember that Jesus' authority rests not so much in some claim that he's Son of God or the fact that he bears the title Messiah. No, the authority of Jesus rests on the reality that he truly cares about creating a world of justice and peace, that he is concerned about the needs of all people in general and all people in particular. Luke tells us this story to remind us that Jesus doesn't just care about us, he cares about you and you and you and you. That's where his authority rests. Jesus' authority rests on the fact that he is willing to go where we go, even if that means facing death itself. The authority of Jesus rests on these stories that demonstrate over and over and over again that when we do as Jesus commands, when we love God by loving our neighbor, the result is always a bit of healing and a bit of reconciliation. And the result is always a better life for us and a better world for all. For the Christian, that ultimately is what it means to be under orders. You and I, as followers of Jesus, are under orders. And the order, the command, is simply this: love God, love your neighbor. That's the orders that we have been given. Those are the marching orders. And in obeying them, in being willing to follow Jesus anywhere, we will be led to the healing we long for. The healing we long for in our world, and the healing each of us longs for in our own individual lives. Sisters and brothers, you and I, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, are under orders.